What's up guys, and welcome to this action RPG tutorial. Today we're going to take a look at pickups, so we will see how to add a new weapon, for example armor and some consumables. So the pickup system uses a data table. So if we go here inside the inventory system, we have multiple data tables. So you can use as many data tables as you want. Usually you want to have multiple data tables for each category. For example, here we have weapons, armor, etc. So I have this folder right here, and we're going to start by making our first weapon. So we'll make a weapon, and then we'll see some settings that we can play with, and then we'll make some armor and some consumables. So as we will see here, creating a new pickup is extremely easy, and it's pretty much the same way across all pickups. So it's just a matter of filling in the right settings. So we're going to create a new data table, so we can either like copy one of these data tables, so we can like drag it over some folder and do like copy and then clear the data table and add in new pickups, or we can simply right click here, go to miscellaneous, and then select data table. And here the data table uses a struct called if item info. So I'm going to select that and click OK, and I'm going to name this data table DT tutorial weapons. This is where I'm going to add my new weapons. All you need to do here is just click on add here, and then we can start filling in our pickup info. Let's go ahead and create a new sword. So I'm going to first enter the item ID here. Of course, it has to be unique to each pickup here. So we're going to simply select my sword. And very important here, the item ID needs to be the same as the row name here. So that's very important. So we can simply double click here on the new row and paste the same ID. So row name, item ID, same thing. So unique ID here, this is something that the server set, so we don't care about it. Actor class is the pickup version of our new pickup. So we can go ahead and create that right now. So inside this folder tutorial, I'm going to right click here, do blueprint class, and look for main pickup. So we have two classes here, main pickup class, if your pickup is a skeletal mesh. And we can also use the main pickup class underscore SM if your pickup is a static mesh. So this sword is a skeletal mesh. So let's go ahead and create or select the BP main pickup class. I'm going to go ahead and do select, and I'm going to name it BP underscore my sword. Then I'm going to open this new blueprint, and I should be able to see here a collision box used for collision and physics, and then the skeletal mesh here used for the mesh itself. So this is going to be the pickup version that you place on the world for the player to pick up. So here I'm going to select the Omega sword, and I'm going to go ahead and rotate the item here, so we can of course place it on the world correctly. So I can go ahead and do this. So for the box here, you don't want to modify the scale because it's going to scale everything. What we want to do here is modify the box extent. So we want to modify the box extent right here to, of course, fit the sword. And of course, this box, once again, act as collision and is also used for physics. So box extent right here, so we can start. So for the X here, I can select something like 100, for example, and then I can move the sword there, for example. So go ahead and change these however you want. Okay, so this one looks good enough. So the most important thing here is you want to select the pickup component and then select where this pickup exists, which is of course inside this DT tutorial weapon. So I can go ahead and look for a DT tutorial weapon and indicate the item ID here. So the item ID here is my sword, and once again make sure that the item ID and row name match. So go ahead and select that and then compile, save. So now we can go back to the data table and indicate that actor class. You can go ahead and look for the BP my sword, which is this one. So for the type here, so it depends on where this item is going to be equipped. So if we go ahead and look for main inventory, so this is our main inventory, and we have these equipment slots. So this is our primary, this is our secondary slot, as you can see here in the equip to, or the slot type right there. And of course these are pants, cape, etc. So we're going to have another video explaining everything about the inventory here and how to add new slots and modify them. But for the time being, these are equipment slots indicated by the container type here. As you can see here, it says equip to slot, and this right here is a of type inventory. So if you want to modify the number of columns and rows, for example, we can limit the rows to only 5, as you can see there, maybe 3 so we can see it correctly. Or we can, of course, increase the number of row and inside this inventory. Whereas this one right here is a 1 by 1 because it's an equipment slot. Of course, these settings right here are pretty straightforward. So these are the highlight colors. This is the slot size of the equipment slot, and the image to display here, and then what key to use to rotate the item, key to split a stackable item, the drag behavior. So feel free to change these settings however you want, but we will have a dedicated video dedicated to the inventory widgets here and how to customize them and add new slots, etc. So for the time being, this is our primary slot, as we can see here. This is our secondary, belt, gloves, etc. So since this weapon can be equipped to our primary, we can simply set the type to primary weapon. If we're creating a shield, for example, we can set the type to a secondary weapon there. And if we have, of course, if we're creating pants or something, then we'll change to pants. For now, this is going to be our primary weapon. Specific type, this is optional, but you can set a specific type. We'll see later how to add more types, but it can be used here to drive some custom logic in Blueprint. But for now, we can set the specific type here to sword. Equipment type here, since it's a weapon, we can indicate whether it's a one-handed or two-handed. If we were creating an armor, then we can simply leave it at none. But for now, we're going to make it a two-handed. Later, we'll make it so you can dual wield the sword, and then we'll go back here and make it a one-handed. But for now, it's a two-handed. For equip to, this is where you indicate where this weapon is allowed to be equipped. For now, we will only allow it to be equipped on our primary slot because it's a two-handed. So of course, it's not going to be equipped to our secondary. Supported classes here, you indicate what classes are allowed to equip this weapon. For now, we're going to put all. So your classes or your character class can be set inside the component that is found in the player controller. So inventory component, and this is your class right here. So you can select a class, and of course that will determine what weapons you are allowed to equip. In this case, we simply set all, so all classes can equip this weapon. So right now we're going to go ahead and handle our main equipment sockets. So when the sword is equipped to the character, the weapon is correctly attached to the character. So I'm going to go ahead and look for the mannequin here. Open the skeletal mannequin, then select the animation tab, and then I can look for some animation to use as a reference. So for example, idle animation is fine, and go ahead and pause the animation. And what I can do here is I can select the hand R bone here, and I can right click and do add socket. So we can name it my sword for simplicity here. Then I'm going to copy this name right here, go to the data table here, and indicate that socket right here. So when this sword is equipped to the character, this socket is going to use to attach the weapon to the character. But of course, we need to go ahead and modify the socket here so the weapon is correctly attached to the character. So what we can do here is right click on the socket that we just created and do add preview asset, and then look for that Omega sword. And we can disable snapping here to get some precise results, of course. So what you want to do here is go ahead and move the socket and rotate it as well to get some good results. So this is good enough for the example. Let's go ahead and go back to the data table here and fill in the rest of the information. Next, we have equipment to equip. This is the blueprint that is going to be equipped to your character. So for that, we need to go back here and create a new blueprint. So this is the pickup version, but we need a equipable version of this sword. So we can right click here, do blueprint class, and look for main equipment. So we have BP main equipment. So let's go ahead and select that. Do BP my sword main equipment. So this is the sword that is going to be equipped to your character. So this is going to be placed on the world, but this one is the one that's going to be equipped. So you can go ahead and open that blueprint. We can select the skeletal mesh there, and of course this is where you add extra effects, etc. So going to select the same sword. So the name is Omega sword. So once we set the mesh here, that's all we need to do. We don't have to modify or move anything. So let's go ahead and close this blueprint. And now we can indicate that equipment here. So equipment to equip, we can go ahead and do my sword main equipment. So the rarity here, of course, indicates the background color of your pickup. Next, we're going to leave this unchecked because the item is not going to stack. We can go directly here to indicate the item image. So I'm gonna look for that Omega sword texture and set the equip version here as well. For the dimension here is going to be something like 2 by 3, for example. And then the weight, we can set something like 200 and leave the durability at 100. We will see the capacity later when we create our consumable. For now, we're going to select name as my sword. So the display name here is, of course, we can simply say sword or Omega, why not? We'll see it later on in the inventory here. So crafting and vendor, crafting we'll talk about in our crafting video, but for vendor, you can set the sell value of this item and the vendor. So we can set something like 2 gold. So, so far we can go ahead and test if we can pick up the item, and we'll go back here and set some stats for the weapon. Let's go ahead and drag our pickup version here in the world and see if we can pick it up. We should be able to see the name of the item there, so we can go ahead and click on it. And there you go. So it's 2 by 3, and this is the display name. As you can see there, it says Omega. And if I go ahead and equip it to the character, it should be equipped to the indicated socket. So before we move on to random stats, as you can see here, we cannot equip it to the secondary slot. We cannot equip it to anything here other than the primary. So let's say that I want this weapon to be dual wielded. So first of all, I need to indicate that this weapon is a one-handed. Then I need to add the secondary here as another supported slot. And finally, just add another socket for the offhand where the weapon is going to be attached. So I can go back here to the animation here. Then I'm going to select the left hand this time. Going to right click on hand underscore L, add another socket. This time I'm going to name it my sword. And then underscore offhand, for example. Then I can go back to the data table and indicate that socket right here. So equip to offhand socket. I can paste that socket right there. So my sword offhand. But of course you need to modify the location and rotation of the socket. So we're going to do the same thing. Once again, right click on the socket and do add preview, and then add the mesh right there. Then we can go ahead and rotate the mesh and then try to get something like this. So something like this doesn't have to be precise for our example here. So now we should be able to equip both of them to our character. So if we go right here, pick both of them, and then as you can see, we can equip right here, and this is still empty. We can go ahead and drag our weapon, and as you can see now, our character is able to dual wield these swords. Now we're going to talk about stats. As you can see, this sword doesn't have any stats, so we need to indicate those inside the data table. So when it comes to stats, we have fixed stats and random stats. So let's go ahead and look for that right here. So we're going to start with fixed stats. So if you don't need a weapon to have any random stats, you can indicate your stats directly or the default stats. So item stats right here, we can go ahead and click on the plus sign. First, we're going to start by adding a bonus attack, which is the weapon attack. So this should be usually your first stat. And the attack can be, of course, can be like a min and a max. So we can do, for example, between 100 and 120, for example. And then we can add another stat, for example, strength, why not? And then min max here, we can simply indicate the same value, for example 20 strength here, to always have the same value. So now if we go ahead and pick up the sword, we should now see an attack between 100 and 120 and strength set to 20. So it should always be the same stat, as you can see between both swords. So for random stats, you can go ahead and keep these default stats if you want. You can also clear them and they will be replaced by these, but sometimes you might want to, in certain situations, use the default stats, for example in crafting, or sometimes replace them with random stats. So in this case, we're going to expand the random stats, and we're going to start once again by adding the bonus attack here as our first attack or stat. So bonus attack, this time is going to be random. For example, I'm going to do from 100 to 150. So for the chance here is going to always be 100% here. So we always want attack on our weapon, and this is very important because this is a min and a max value is going to be is range stat going to be set to true here, and the result is an integer. That's fine, we don't want any decimals. And for the max stats here, we can set something like 3. So if we go ahead right now and play, we should now be able to see some random stats. So for example, this one has 106 to 133, whereas this one has 147 to 149. If we go back to the pickup version of the sword and select the pickup component, we have a checkbox here called randomize stats. So if we disable this, of course, the default stats are going to be used instead. Let's go ahead and add some more stats here. So we're going to click on the plus sign there, add some string, minimum value, for example, 20 to 50. And then the chance here, we can indicate, for example, 50% chance, or we can have it 100%. And the randomness is going to come from like the min and max. Let's go and add something else. For example, lifesteal here. This time we're going to set the chance here to, for example, 50%. And min value here is going to be like 20 or 5 to 20%. And the result is not going to be an integer. So I'm going to check to disable that or set that to false. And is not going to be a range stat. And of course, you can add as many stats as you want, and then you can limit them by the max stats here. So you're always gonna have 3 stats no matter what. So let's go ahead and pick both of these swords and see what we got. So this one right here has 29 strength and 14.46% lifesteal, whereas this one did not get the lifesteal roll, but of course it did get 49 strength and of course better attack. Let's go ahead and see how to add the new armor. It's pretty much the same thing. Going to create a new folder for that and call it armor. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new data table. This time I'm going to actually duplicate this one, so I can drag it there, do copy, and then I'm going to rename it to armor. And what I can do here is I can clear this one right here, just remove and then click on the add there. So I can name this my armor as well. And of course, same thing, an ID and row name needs to be the same. Actor class here will create it right now. So in this case, the pickup version is going to be a static mesh, but the equipment version is going to be a skeletal mesh. So we're going to start by making the pickup version. So blueprint class here and domain pickup. This time I'm going to select the SM version and I'm going to name it BP my armor. Then I'm going to open that, and then I'm going to select the static mesh this time and then select my static mesh armor. So this is just the pickup version. But this is not the one that's going to be equipped. We'll make the equipment version later. And of course, the box extent here, we can change things a little bit here. So for example, 2020. Data table right here, very important. We want to indicate the data table once again. So that's going to be tutorial armor. And the item ID here is my armor. So the item ID here is going to be my armor. Compile, save, go back to the data table here, and actor class, set that my armor. So let's go ahead and add some other things here. So the type here is going to be armor, body armor. Specific type here, I don't have to indicate anything for now, but of course it can be used at runtime to determine or to get that value and do something specific with it. Equipment type here is going to be none, because it's not a one-handed nor a two-handed. For the equip to here is going to only be equipped to the armor slot. So I can select that right there. So body armor. And for the supported classes here, I'm going to select all. Since this is a mesh or a skeletal mesh that's going to follow the main character mesh, we don't have to indicate any sockets. So let's go ahead and create the equipment version here. So I'm going to right click here and do main equipment once again. So select the BP main equipment and I'm going to name it BP my armor. So my armor main equipment. Like that, and all I need to do here is once again just select the skeletal mesh and indicate the mesh here. So this time you're going to indicate the skeletal mesh version that's going to be equipped to the character. So if I go ahead and look for armor, so I have SK armor. So the difference here is that this armor right here has the same skeleton as the main mesh. So if we go ahead and open that, as you can see here, it's going to have the same skeleton tree as the main character mesh. This way, of course, it's able to follow the main mesh animation. That's all we need to do here. You can feel free to change the color or add some extra effects as well. So we go back to the data table here and we can indicate it right here. So equipment to equip, that's going to be my armor. And so for the rest of the settings, it's pretty straightforward. You can indicate the image here. So I can do something like armor. For the dimensions here, I can say that it's a 2 by 2. So item name, armor here, and of course the same thing for stats. We've seen that with the weapon, so it should be pretty much the same thing. So now we can add our pickup version to the world and go ahead and pick it up. And if we equip it to the character, as you can see, the character is going to be to equip the armor, and of course it follows the animation of the main character. For consumables, it's pretty much the same thing. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these examples. So the red potion, as you can see here, the actor class, of course, this is the pickup version. It doesn't have any equipment version because obviously it's not going to be equipped. It doesn't have any sockets, so it's simply, first of all, you have to indicate that it's a consumable. For the specific type here, we can set something like healing potion. Equipment type is not going to be any, is going to be none, of course. Equipped to, it does not get equipped to anything. The only thing you need to change here is to set the CAD stack to true, and then the max stack here, of course, what's the maximum stack. And so when you drag something like this potion, so if I go ahead and look for the pickup version here and just put in the world, if you select the pickup and go to the details panel, you should be able to see a new count variable. So -1 is going to take that count from the data table, but in this case it's 2. So if I override this by, let's say 5, if I go ahead and play, you're going to see that we have 5 potions there. So I already have 5, so I go ahead and pick up that one. It's going to stack and of course be 10. So let's go ahead and take a look at the HP bottle here. So the most important thing here is to simply make it a consumable. So when you right click, it gives you the option to consume. And of course, what you want to do here is you want to make the capacity here something like, so X would be the min and Y is the max. So in this case, it's a 4, it has 4 charges and it has a maximum of 4 charges. So it's 4 by 4. And of course it doesn't stack, obviously. So a bottle is not going to stack, but most importantly here is the capacity here. So that's the only difference here between these things. So this one does not stack, but it has a capacity, min and a max. In this example, by default, when the character respawns, your bottles will be refilled automatically. So the way to do it here is if we go to the player controller and then get the inventory component, we can call the refill function here. So refill capacity by type. So we can, for example, call this when I press the middle mouse here. So all you have to do here is just indicate all the item IDs that you want to use to refill those bottles. So we can indicate here the HP bottle, and then we can go ahead and compile and save. And then of course, if I go ahead and use or consume all my bottle charges here, I can press the middle mouse button here, and as you can see, those chargers are now refilled. And of course, you can also add as many types here as you want. And so this is the function that you want to use to refill your bottles. Finally, let's go ahead and take a look at the struct used inside the data table. So the struct is called ifItemInfo. This is the structure that is used with the data table. As you can see, we have item ID, unique ID, actor class. If you want to modify the struct, feel free. Of course, if you want to add more types, you can go to, let's go ahead and do Control P. So it's going to be inside inventory system, jigsaw data, and then we can go to enums. And here we have our item types, the JSI item types, and of course our secondary type. So what you want to do here is once you modify the struct is you want to find the jig container, and of course compile the jig container and also compile the jig slot. So just make sure that whenever you modify the ifItemInfo or one of its enums, in order to avoid any issues, or in case you have any issues, just make sure or go back here and compile the jig container and jig slot, and you should be fine. So I think that's pretty much it for this video. If you have any questions, let me know. We will have another video dedicated to stats and how to add more stats, and of course control the behavior of attributes in general. And of course, go ahead and watch the other videos about skills and crafting, vendors, etc. So until then, stay safe. Thank you for watching. See you later. Goodbye.